So what we're talking about today is signal optimization. Ultimately, how can we feed ad platforms like Meta, Google, and so on the best signals? And ultimately, I think what hopefully most of us care about here today is lowering our CAC or improving ROAS. My name's Shumel. My background's in performance marketing. Spent the last 15 years in app marketing. Most recently, I've been learning about data science and how we can apply that to performance marketing. And that's where we've recently launched a company called Day 30. So we're still quite early stage in this business. And today we're going to share some of our learnings in this space. So I think as marketers in this room, we're all probably facing some level of pressure. I think competition is increasing. We're seeing an explosion of apps from AI-generated apps exploding in the App Store. We're seeing, a result of that, CPMs going up. I think there's more pressure from from business investors to just constantly grow faster and more efficiently. And what I think I feel like we've got against ourselves at the moment is these ad platforms are just becoming more and more algorithmic or black box. Like if we were to go back a few years ago, as performance marketers, there was a lot of levers we could pull, a lot of things that we could change. And I think as things become more algorithmic, a lot of that is going away. So what levers are left for us to control? And I think there's really two where we see left. So the first one being creative. I'm sure a lot of people are spending a lot of time and investment trying to find winners, trying to find different ways to optimize creative. But I think that could also be under threat at some point as well. Like with a lot of the AI tools coming in, I think that's going to potentially be taken away or limited. So then what's really left for us as marketers to work on? And this is where I think signal comes in. So I think a lot of us have maybe heard the term like creative is king. And then another nice phrase I heard from someone is if creative is king, then signal is queen. And that you kind of need both to work together. And when we talk about signal, really what we define as signal is the defined goal event for your campaign. So what were we telling the campaign to go after? Is it registrations? Is it installs? Is it trials, etc.? And the way I think of signals in the context of ad platforms, it's really helping algorithms to learn what good looks like. And I think if you think of how algorithms work, it's very similar to if I was to think of a sports team and think of a scout trying to be tasked to find the best players. They're typically tasked with getting a goal from the team first. So it might be, we want players that are going to score 10 goals in the first season. That allows the scout to go and look at, what other players have been able to do something like that. What are their characteristics? Is there a certain height, speed, experience? And when we translate this back to advertising, algorithms work in a very similar way. What we feed the algorithms tells them what good looks like, so they can go and find other users that look similar. So if you think of something like a Meta, it could be, the demographic, the interests that you're into, and so on. So that's really why signals are so important to ad platforms. But I think the challenge that we face with signals, and again, I'm sure a lot of folks have faced it when it comes to iOS in particular, is signals stop at day 7. And I'm sure what we all care about happens beyond that. So if you think of, we might be focused on driving customer acquisition, which is considered a paying customer. Or a paying subscriber, or it might be ROAS, which happens on day 14, day 30, etc. But this becomes this visibility gap. So Meta can only see what's in the attribution window, which people typically set to day 1 or day 7 as a maximum. And that's why when I speak to a lot of app developers, especially in the subscription space, they are ultimately optimizing to a cost per trial because they can't go beyond that. So when we think of signal optimization, the whole purpose of it is really to solve this problem. How can we help algorithms find more of what they can't see? And that matters to us ultimately. And ultimately what we're really talking about is making a prediction. How do we take what we care about? So if it is a day 15 renewal in this instance, can we predict that in day 1? So the algorithm has more opportunity to learn and find what we're after. So I guess the promise of today's session is we're going to run through a framework that's going to show you how to test the best signals. There's probably a lot of different use cases and verticals in the room. So just to be upfront with everyone, this is going to work best for subscription apps, fintech, potentially e-commerce, anywhere where you've got like a first purchase as the kind of primary goal. It can still work for gaming. There'll still be some takeaways off the back of this, but that's the examples that we use today. Just a quick story on kind of when signal optimization can go wrong, and some past experience before started learning about data science and how that can impact. So this was an app that I did some consulting for quite a few years ago. It was a restaurant booking app based in London, and their goal was to get first-time bookings, people that are going to download the app and book a restaurant. The challenge that we had was it's quite rare that someone would see an ad and then download the app and book a restaurant straight away. They're probably, speaking to their friends, speaking to their partners, thinking of availability, and then they would book maybe 1 or 2 weeks later. And we wanted signals quicker. We didn't want to wait that long to optimize. And this was me as a marketeer in a spreadsheet, just getting to events such as bookings and restaurant page visits. And this line looked kind of like it correlated. So I thought, okay, I've done a great job. It correlates. And we started running campaigns optimizing to restaurant pages visited. And it didn't result in the uplift that we wanted. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as correlating two events. That's when this company, they actually got a data science consultant in at the time. And just he came and presented that what we did was not very accurate and presented a new method, which is some of what we're going to run through today. That data scientist is actually John, who's sat over here. He's now my co-founder, and learned a lot from him. So my goal really is to how can we make data science as accessible as possible to marketers and make it really easy to digest. So 3-point framework is what we're going to learn through today. And ultimately, it's about how do we evaluate its predictive signal when we care about day 8, CAC, day 14 behavior. How can we predict that early on? So I'm going to walk through this is a fictional app. So this doesn't exist. This is Nano Banana Pro. It wasn't inspired by Duolingo or anything. So we go through a couple of assumptions. So it's an iOS only app. Offers an annual plan with a 7-day free trial, which is probably one of the most common kind of plans that I see. 90% of people who start a trial do so on day 1. Their current meta signal is set to start trial because of the challenges that we mentioned earlier. They can't optimize beyond that. Their core business goal is customer acquisition, and they define that as their CAC is defined as paying subscriber. And that's, again, really what we're going to try and solve for in this session today. How can we predict this day 8 conversion by day 1? So the first thing that whenever making a prediction is always really important to do is start off with a really clear prediction statement. And we write this out as a sentence. So I want to predict which users, and then we'd have a criteria. So which users who start a free trial within 24 hours. And the key thing here is having a time bound. So it's really easy to compare when we're looking back to see how accurate was our predictions. We're only focusing on start trials because for anyone to become a paying subscriber, they need to start a trial to begin with. The next is also defining what success looks like. So in this example, it's a subscriber, again, specifically on day 8, so having a really defined cohort window. That's an example of something that we didn't do when we showed that restaurant booking example that didn't work. And the last is like, what's our observation window? When do we want to make this prediction within? So in this example, 24 hours, that's what we're going to get tasked with. So the first of our 3 factors in this kind of framework is precision. And precision is ultimately the conversion rate of the signal. So the best way to think of this is, past behavior ultimately sets the probability of future predictions. So again, there's a lot of industries where predictions get used. So if we think of something like car insurance, the way they would come up with premiums on individuals is they'll look at historical data and see, what's been the claim rate. Is it someone who lives in a certain area? Is it someone who drives a black car instead of a white car? They all maybe have probabilities of accidents or claims and so on, and they apply that. And it's really the same principle for us as app marketeers. It's looking at historically what have users done and what's been the conversion rate of those behaviors. So again, if we go back to our app, language learning app, and think of, what behaviors or characteristics might a user do in the first 24 hours, that's going to influence the trial conversion rate. So any ideas of what might be something that you could track in the user behavior?
Doing lessons.
Lessons, yeah. App opens. Yeah. Sorry, say that again. Email sign up, yeah, for sure.
Time of usage.
time of usage, yeah, you could keep going, right? So there's so much behavior that we're tracking, hopefully, in something like a mixed panel or your attribution tool. So here are just a few examples. Cancelled trial is also a really interesting one. Some apps, a lot of that happens early on. Some, it happens a bit later. So these are, again, just a few examples. And for the purpose of this, we're going to continue with these examples. So again, the formula for precision is the conversion rate, so actual conversions divided by the signals we sent. These are the signals that we're going to evaluate. So based on earlier thinking of, what might influence someone going from starting a trial to becoming a paying customer. So at the top, we've got start trial only. They convert at about 25%. On the opposite end, we've got a hypothetical perfect prediction. So that would be someone converting at 100%. We're going to convert every single person who predicts without any fail. That's just to give you the spectrum. And then we've got these three examples. So users who started a trial and looked at a leaderboard view in the first 24 hours, someone who did 3 lessons or 10 lessons, and that's what we're going to evaluate as we go. So looking at this, we might think, okay, the start trial plus 10 lessons, that's got the 60% conversion rate. Surely we should optimize to that because that's going to give us the highest quality users. And that's where the second part of this framework comes in, which is signal volume. So the amount of signal that we send. And the way to think of this again from an algorithmic perspective is the algorithms need enough signals to spot a pattern. And again, if I was to liken it to a real world example, could be if you think of a realtor trying to find your perfect apartment in Berlin, and imagine you could only send them pictures for them to find your apartment. And if you could only send one picture, then they might have a bit of a hard time trying to find exactly what you're looking for. Whereas if you send 10, then they'll be able to find a pattern. And the opposite, if you were to send 1,000, then it might get a little bit lost to what you're looking for. So ad platforms work in the same way. When you're setting up a campaign, like the volume of signals you provide, there's always a minimum that you want to send. So platforms like Meta and so on can spot these patterns. There isn't any documented exact answer to what each platform needs. Facebook in the past has talked about 50 conversions per campaign per week. And that was a while ago. That's maybe changed a bit. Thomas has shared some really good stuff about this spectrum, and he's talked about a minimum of 10 signals per campaign per day. And that's quite similar to some of the learnings that we've had as well. And you see this nice little graph where we always got to balance that quantity over quality, where if you're already getting a really high conversion, if you're getting a high volume of signals today, you probably have a bigger opportunity to optimize further. And that's one way to think of it is, when we think of predictions, like if you're only getting 10 start trials today per campaign, then maybe signal optimization isn't right for you just yet, because you're always going to need a lot more volume before you start going down funnel. Whereas if you're a slightly larger app and you've got, let's say, 1,000 start trials, you can maybe be a bit more bullish and think, okay, how am I going to predict a first renewal or a second renewal and so on. So again, if we apply this now into our table, and look at those 3 signal options that we have. So what we see again is the signal volume can vary as we're getting to kind of stricter rules. So which one we decide would really depend on the budget of the campaign or the budget of the app. So again, if it's an app that has pretty good budget, they could go straight to start trial and 10 lessons because it's got the highest conversion rate. Yes, the signal volume drops, but it's maybe still enough for their budget. So we would think that's potentially the way to go. But this is where this third and last part of the framework comes in, which is called recall in machine learning, but we could think of it as missed conversions. So high precision or high conversion rate doesn't mean necessarily we've captured all the conversions. And the way to think about this, again, it gets used a lot in the healthcare industry. So when you're trying to predict for if someone's going to get a future illness and trying to detect it early, there'll be loads of health markers that they look at. So there may be something like your blood sugar levels at a certain time. And they may set a quite high threshold. If it's at this level, then you're likely to get diabetes. But what happens with recall is maybe that precision's high. You're really strong at predicting that user, but then you miss loads of other people because there's people that don't get to that marker and still get an illness. And again, performance marketing isn't as serious as some of those examples, but it's the same principle. You could have a really high conversion rate. So if we think of our start trial plus 10 lessons, but what happens now is there's a big drop in recall. So there's about 60% of users who do convert that we're not capturing. And that's what ultimately that last column is. And the significance of that on an ad platform like Meta is, think of it as you're telling Meta a user is bad when actually they're good. So it can mess with the algorithm. So in this example, if we were to look at these, we can see how precision and volume and recall varies. And we got to kind of start with our budget and then go from there. So kind of bringing it all together, this framework is really to validate the signal, or think of how can we validate a prediction before spending $1 of ad spend. We have two ends of the spectrum. So we've got our baseline of all trials started. On the baseline, you'll always get 100% recall, 100% volume, because that's where we're starting from. And then if you were to predict perfectly, then you have 100% precision, 100% recall because you're capturing everyone, but your volume naturally would reduce because there's fewer people. And what we're trying to find is something in the middle that's the best. So our goal of signal optimization is really about how do we maximize precision, get the highest conversion rate, whilst maintaining high recall. So we're not telling Facebook these are bad users when they're actually good, and ensuring it's for the minimum required volume. And that is really dynamic for each advertiser in each app. So in this example, again, quite a lot of numbers on the screen and some funky graphs, but we're ultimately trying to get precision as high as possible while keeping an eye on recall. So the start trial plus 3 lessons would probably be the best example, where it's increased your precision pretty significantly by almost 50%. Your volume's dropped a bit, but the recall's still high, so we're capturing as many users as possible. So that's, again, like what I've run through so far may sound like quite a lot of theory. So how does it actually work in practice with some live examples? So this is an app that we've been helping. They're called Picnic. They're a photo organizing storage app that helps you sort your photos. And they actually had an attempt at signal engineering themselves. And we were able to use this framework to have a look at it. So you've got a baseline at the bottom. So again, full recall, full volume is where it starts. And their goal was, can we find a high quality user? Because only X% of these actually convert to paying. So what they opted for, and they did some research on their end, but they didn't have something like this, is they landed on someone who starts a trial and syncs 9,000 photos. That is what they thought would be a really high quality user. When we put it through this framework, what we saw was precision or conversion rate did increase slightly by about 15%, but it was at the cost of losing about 35% of recall. So there was 35% of users who did convert that they stopped sending because of this, and the volume dropped as well. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily the best signal, and there was always room to kind of optimize further. But by having this in place, now they can test other ideas and so on. And I guess what we've ran through is maybe just an example of something that I think everyone in this room hopefully can take away and test if they've got some ideas on signal optimization and what they can do. This does go a lot deeper. You can apply machine learning to it, and that's some of the stuff that we're working on. And what ultimately machine learning does is, if you think of in a really simplistic way, there's these decision trees. It's finding buckets of users that have, the biggest splits in behavior and looking at what those conversion rates are. So each individual user has different conversion rates. And with Picnic, so that's one where we actually applied machine learning on this to find a better signal, which was a bit more dynamic. And that was able to increase precision by about 40%, keeping recall about 80%. So again, there's a lot of opportunity. So with these guys, we're at a stage where it's about finding the right signal and now testing it live. I guess the next question is, okay, great, we can predict something really well. Does this actually result in lower CAC or higher ROAS? And this is the next live example. So this is another app we've been working with. They're called, the brand's actually called Social. They've got like a dozen apps. So it's like an app studio. This example is like a celebrity lookalike app. They do a 3-day trial with a weekly subscription. That's their model. And again, they wanted high quality users, not just people who are going to start a trial and leave and so on. So the first thing is, again, just going back to right at the start of when we talk about, how do algorithms work? And ultimately, this is probably a really good example of, Meta delivering exactly what you tell it to deliver. So we had 3 campaigns. They were all run with pretty tight experiments, running a few $1,000s over the period. And so even spend. So 3 campaigns. One was optimizing to a cost per install. One was optimizing to a cost per trial. And the third was optimizing to our machine learning predictive signal. So what we can see is, when we tell Meta, go find this campaign optimized to installs, it gets us the cheapest installs. When we ask for it to find a trial event, it's going to get you the cheapest cost per trial. And then the last one, we kind of called it a trial plus because it was going beyond that, or it was a predictive converter. You can see it gets you the best of that. And then when we've translate all of that to CAC and ROAS, like the results on this were pretty phenomenal. And these are again all real numbers. We've obviously had to index the numbers to 100 just for client privacy and so on. But again, we were pretty pleased with how this turned out, and we're continuing to test this on more apps as well. But I think, again, this is just an example of how we've approached it. I think a lot of folks in this room could probably go and have a test of doing this themselves. So yeah, I think it's a really good example of signal engineering ultimately has the power to lower your CAC, increase ROAS. If there was 5 steps, just to simplify this, is always start with defining a clear prediction statement. Always think of, in that the cohort period. So you've always got consistent cohorts when you're doing this analysis. Validate conversion rates of potential behaviors and just start with your hunch. Like, you don't need machine learning to get started on this. You might have a hunch of what your users are doing in your app, and you'll know this is all specific to every app. Assess the signal volume versus your budget. So again, always remember 10 conversions per campaign per day as a minimum, and ideally slightly more is better. And don't forget about recall. So making sure, we're not getting something that converts too high, but we're missing all those users that are converting. And just test and iterate, really. So thanks for listening through that. I know there's quite a lot to digest on as the last session of the day. But definitely feel free to connect. More than happy to send you the slides. If you've got questions, let us know. And we're actively looking at design partners. So if you wanted to test this with us at no cost, that's also something that we can help with. So I'll open it up. It is meant to be a workshop, so I'll open it up for any questions that anyone's got.